Hey YouTube, it's Steven and welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about colorism. So what else is new, right? But I kind of want to get you guys' opinion about something. Um, and just kind of see your experiences when it comes to this topic, okay? So where I'm coming from with this video is, um, I want to know, do you have conversations about colorism or have had conversations about colorism amongst your family and or your friends? Because I feel like when it comes to family, this is kind of like something that isn't really discussed. Like we typically, like, we could discuss racism a lot. Like we tend to discuss racism a lot as like black people, and also our own personal experiences with racism as well. But when it comes to colorism, it seems like that's something that's sort of not spoken about. At least, perhaps in my experience. um, Thinking back on my childhood, I don't think there were really many conversations about colorism in my family. Um, I know on my father's side of the family, I don't remember colorism ever coming up, you know, or anything, or even anything alluding to colorism, right? And as far as like my mom's side of the family is concerned, like my mom may have mentioned it like maybe in passing here or there, once, twice, a couple of times, but at most, right? But never like in-depth conversations about it, right? Like, oh, the ills of colorism are um, what you may experience as a lighter skinned black person, or what you may experience as a darker skinned black person, or how people may perceive you, etc., etc., right? None of that, right? None of that. And as far as and, and as far as amongst friends, not really. I know, like, when I was a kid, like me and some folks in the neighborhood would kind of like make references to our skin tones. It wasn't like in a derogatory way or anything, but we would like we would make references to our skin tones because in like the neighborhood I lived in, it was like a majority black neighborhood, and usually if you live in a majority black neighborhood, you know, chances are you're going to be seeing like brown and dark skinned people, right? So the majority were, as usual, brown and dark skinned people. But there were some lighter skinned folks. I know there was this lighter skinned girl in particular. May she rest in power, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, like we were kind of like, I guess, the two light skinned folks on our side of the apartment complex we lived in. And I think we kind of mentioned it like here and there, but we never really had like, in-depth conversations about, the situation. um, Amongst the other kids in the neighborhood, it'd be like, oh, oh, there's a lot of light skinned people here. Like, if like, oh, it was like, oh, let me see, let me think of something. Um, it was like, oh, uh, a friend was at the pool, and then this person had talked to my friend. It's like, oh, us black people got to stick together. And then it was like, well, what about me? Something to that effect, right? Or either, oh, I'm, the light skinned person or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird because I don't remember the the phrasing like verbatim and the situations verbatim because they were like such a long time ago. This is back in like the 90s. Uh, so as far as my neighborhood, no. As far as school, No, no conversations about colorism at school, whether it was by students or by teachers. Not really, And I went to majority black schools as well, so no, no one really mentioned, you know, not really. I can't really think of anything. Um, I feel like they may have come up, but I can't think of anything. They should have come up at least. Maybe that's it. Like, they should have come up. It would have been great if they did come up, but no, I can't really think of any conversations about, uh, colorism, right? um, as far as college is concerned, a little bit, tiny little bit. Um, I had this friend who was a coworker of mine, and we kind of spoke on it. He's light skinned as well, and we spoke on it for like a brief second, a very brief second, you know. But I feel like this is probably like the only form or forum that I've really been able to have conversations about colorism, because I really, you know, yeah, it just seems like probably would be like, oh, the elephant in the room, awkward conversations. And I think that's part of the reason why I think people kind of like gravitate towards these type of videos that I post, because they can't really talk about these things in their day-to-day life, but they want to talk about them. So this is kind of like a forum for that as well. Oftentimes when we do have conversations about colorism, usually it's often centered around women, but of course we know colorism affects the whole black community, not just women. But oftentimes when we see people talking about colorism, it's usually, oh, it's a dark skinned woman or a light skinned woman. And if we want a male opinion, they usually go for a dark skinned man's opinion. Usually light skinned men are left out of the equation. I'm not sure why. I do think that's sort of reflective of the community's opinion of light skinned men, like, you know. While it's like, okay, yeah, we can get, we can take the light skinned woman, and the dark skinned man, and like, dark skinned chick. I guess she can come along. I guess, but light skinned dudes, you know, mm, get out of here. um, but yeah, I think this is something to think about, um, because I think we should probably have more conversations about colorism in the community. But I think we don't have these conversations because they're considered divisive, or perhaps perpetuating divisiveness, right? Because a lot of times when they say, "Oh, it's divisive," it's like, "Oh, how can I divide something that's already been divided?" That's a lot of times people make that response. So I'll say, in response to that, it's perpetuating divisiveness, right? So I think that's part of the reason why we as a community perhaps may shy away from this conversation, because I do think it is a tough conversation to have as well. I think as well people are implicated in colorism, you know, um, but I think especially when it comes to like maybe lighter skinned parents who have darker skinned children, I think that they especially need to talk about colorism. But perhaps they probably won't be able to talk about colorism because, they haven't experienced colorism or had conversations about colorisms themselves. Like, for example, a light skinned mom and a dark skinned daughter, right? That would be like, I feel like the mom should definitely have conversations about colorism with her daughter, right? But the mom might not be kind of like equipped to deal with the issues that a dark skinned uh, daughter, her dark-skinned daughter, is going to go through in and outside the community, right? And I think just, lighter skinned people in general um, should probably be aware, you know. Because here's the thing, I feel like darker skinned people are aware of colorism because it affects them more, right? The same with like racism. Like we as black people are much more aware of racism than white people because it affects us more. Because when you're in the privileged position, you can be ignorant. It's set up for you to be ignorant. It's set up for you to be ignorant, whether you are purposely being ignorant or perhaps you are just legitimately ignorant. I know there are some things that I am ignorant to that, some darker skinned black people go through that I never really thought about, honestly. I just thought it was just all the same all around. I had a coworker one time tell me that, because we were like like I was in college at the time, but I was in a different college than the college that I graduated from. In the town that I lived in, it was kind of like probably would be considered like a white college town, but there was a black population with it, though. I think, yeah, the school had at least a sizable black population. I don't know. I think the town probably did too. But yeah, he had mentioned something about going in, to like restaurants or public places, and like white women, especially like older white women, acting like they've seen like a monster or something, like, oh, when they see him, and he's not a monster. I think it's just he's like really really dark, and of course that is a beautiful thing to be really really dark, of course. But the way that society has set it up, it seemed like, oh, dark is something bad, right? And he had kind of like spoke a little bit about that experience. And for me, there was a bit of a disconnect with that experience because that's hasn't really been my experience. Like I, identify as black. I check the black / African American box, but that's an experience that I wouldn't have. So, being ignorant in the sense of how you may be perceived, and thus also that perception will come with, you know, I think that perception plays in a lot into like police brutality too, right? And not to say that light skinned folks don't experience police brutality, of course, because they do. But um, I just feel like if you're darker, you're more likely to experience it. So that's just kind of like an example of how you can be legitimately ignorant because I wasn't being like purposely ignorant. I just didn't know, right? But when we have these conversations, we do we start to know, we start to learn, we start to like, oh, you really go through that, right? I didn't know you go through that. And as well, there's some things that I could tell from my experience that like, oh wow, that's really an issue. Like, oh, that's so strange, I mean, there would be like light skinned tears, but still, like for me, I think for me, it would be like having like something that I would consider like a struggle. Perhaps feeling and having sort of a disconnect between like myself and maybe darker skinned black men when it comes to experience. And sometimes some darker skinned black men may feel like you like you're black, but you don't know the struggle. Like kind of like you a part, kind of like maybe even creating sort of a barrier, right? Because of the experience, right? um, and while I think that may be, I feel like in my personal experience, I don't think I've had a darker skinned black man really say anything like that to me, but they may have thought it, right? And for me, that would be sort of like a struggle. Of course, it's like, light skin tears, right? It's like, I'm sure a dark skinned person looking at, oh, really? That's such a struggle. Like, it's such a struggle that you don't know the struggle, right? But, I warned you, it's just light skin tears. That's why I try not to really, take up space when these conversations of colorism come up, as far as like my personal struggles and things like that. I may end up doing a video at one point or another, and I'll give a disclaimer: light skin tears, right? But I do try not to take up space, right? I try to leave the space for darker skinned people, especially darker skinned women, right? Because I think their struggles are tougher than lighter skinned people's struggles. Overall. Yeah. And also, like, some lighter skinned people may legitimately feel like they don't have any privileges on a personal level because they may have experienced some things here and there in their life. And I can understand them making that argument, but I think we have to look at it in the big scheme, the big picture, right? There is the privileges. Privileges do exist for lighter skinned people, right? And we also have to be honest. This privilege that lighter skinned people have it's an extension of like white privilege. Like, let me think. I want to phrase this right, but colorism is an extension of white supremacy, right? Think about it. Colorism is an extension of white supremacy. You may not be white, but the closer you look to it, the more privilege that comes with that. While I feel like kind of like white light skin privilege is sort of like, maybe it is linked to white privilege, but maybe like a remixed version of white privilege. It's like white-ish privilege. Like, you look white-ish. But these are conversations that we as a community need to have. This is part of the reason why I have started doing these videos too, because there oftentimes in your day-to-day life there isn't a space for you to have these conversations. That's why a lot of times when other YouTubers especially post these type of videos, like, you guys go in on the comment section, because you kind of like, this is like the outlet. This might be your only outlet to really express how you feel about the situation, and to express your struggles with colorism, your experiences with colorism as well. People have colorism experiences inside of their own family that's negative, right? And that's something that is kind of like, it's disheartening to hear, and it's also for me a bit like odd to hear too. To hear people saying like, oh, colorism was present in their household, whereas like, oh, they made a differentiation between the lighter skinned sibling and the dark skinned sibling. I've heard that as well, like adults doing it. Adults perpetuating this with their kids. Again, another reason why we need to have these conversations. Like, a lot of times people in the community want to shy away from these conversations because they know they're implicated in it. They don't want to be called out on their BS. They want to continue to benefit from colorism, and not have to deal with, the consequences, the side effects, etc. But that doesn't help us as a community. It just continues to damage us, and it leaves people feeling resentful, right? As well, I think colorism tends to give darker skinned people self-esteem issues, while it gives lighter skinned people identity issues. But I think I've gone on for long enough. I hope you were able to get something out of this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I thank you very much for posting, commenting, and supporting me and my videos. It's really appreciated, and I thank you very much for it. Until the next video, adios and goodbye for now.